If you listen only to the speeches, tariffs sound like magic. Trump has told rallies and interviews that tariff revenue can fund almost everything politicians usually fight over: $2,000 tariff dividend checks to citizens, a farm bailout, a border wall, Social Security relief, even talk of paying down the national debt or one day cutting income taxes. An analysis of his statements counted at least 9 different big-ticket promises attached to the same pot of tariff money. In Pennsylvania, he even joked that tariffs is his favorite word in the dictionary after religion and family, insisting that smart people finally understand how powerful they are. On paper, tariff revenue looks impressive, about $195 to $236 billion this year in customs duties, depending on which period you measure. But that top-line number hides a simple fact most economists keep repeating: tariffs are taxes on imports, and those taxes don't come from nowhere. A new report from Senate Democrats, backed by data from Yale University's budget lab, puts a price tag on that fact. If current tariff levels stay in place, the typical U.S. household is expected to pay around $2,100 more for goods over the next year because of tariffs alone. That's on top of the roughly $1,200 they estimate families have already paid since Trump returned to the White House this year. Yale's model, which is more conservative, puts the extra annual burden closer to $1,400 for the median family, with the hit varying by income and spending patterns. Either way, the direction is the same. Tariffs add hundreds or thousands of dollars to household expenses, mostly through higher prices on categories like clothing, electronics, and metal-based goods. Some companies try to absorb part of the cost to stay competitive. Many don't. They pass it through line by line until it shows up in your cart total. Think about the math. The Treasury says tariffs brought in under $250 billion this year. That sounds huge until you compare it to individual income taxes, which brought in over $2.05 trillion, more than 10 times as much. When Trump muses about using tariffs to scrap income taxes or balance the budget, the numbers simply don't line up. At best, tariff revenue is a relatively small stream compared to existing tax pillars. At worst, it's an unstable, politically driven stream that fluctuates with exemptions, trade truces, and court rulings. In November, for the first time since the new rounds of duties were imposed, monthly tariff revenue actually fell after the administration quietly lifted or reduced tariffs on items like coffee, oranges, bananas, and cocoa to ease some price pressure. Tariffs are not a bottomless ATM. They're a lever that, when pulled too hard, starts to break things politicians care about: polls on affordability, headlines about $2,100 household hits, and small business anger. The legal uncertainty amplifies this risk. The Supreme Court has just adjourned for a 4-week recess, which means no decision this year on challenges to Trump's emergency-based global tariffs. During arguments in early November, several key justices sounded skeptical that the 1,970 emergency law Trump used, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, was meant to authorize open-ended import taxes across many countries and products. Lower courts have already questioned whether declaring an economic emergency to impose permanent-style tariffs goes beyond what Congress intended. Businesses from retail giants to small import-trade alliance shops have sued to preserve their right to refunds if the court invalidates the tariffs, and Bloomberg reports potential exposure over $88 billion in duties that might have to be returned. With the court on break, Customs and Border Protection keeps collecting billions in tariffs each month from U.S. companies. Those companies face a brutal choice: hold the line on prices and eat the cost, or raise prices and hope customers accept it. Many are choosing the latter, especially smaller importers that don't have the balance sheet to subsidize Washington's trade war indefinitely. A survey cited in coverage shows small business optimism about future sales rising, even as they increasingly say they have no choice but to pass on tariff costs. That's how you get a political paradox: a president claiming to have reduced prices while his policies quietly push them up through the supply chain, and households telling pollsters they feel squeezed even as official inflation gauges slow. Meanwhile, the administration is already sketching Plan B for tariffs if the Supreme Court cuts off Plan A. Reports from Fortune and others say the Commerce Department and the U.S. Trade Representative are studying fallback options under other statutes, like Section 301 and Section 122 of the Trade Act, which also give presidents unilateral authority to impose duties in certain conditions. One official described tariffs as a core part of Trump's agenda, regardless of the court's decision. Trump himself told supporters, "We're waiting for a decision. If it's not good, we always find ways." We find ways. Translation for investors, even a legal defeat won't end tariff risk. It will just change which legal hooks future tariffs hang on. So what does the economy look like from 30 feet? On one hand, the White House can point to some positive trends. The goods trade deficit has narrowed compared to a few years ago as imports slowed and domestic production recovered in some sectors. Reciprocal tariffs have nudged certain multinationals to consider moving factories or data centers to the U.S., and the administration touts each reshoring announcement as proof the policy works. On the other hand, the price of this reset is showing up in that $1,200 to $2,100 household estimate, in strained relationships with allies like India, and in a constant undercurrent of uncertainty that makes long-term planning harder for globally integrated businesses. You can close a trade gap partly by importing less because it became more expensive, but that's not the same as building a stronger, more productive economy. The political narrative tries to square this circle with a simple story. Tariffs are short-term pain for long-term gain. Trump and his team insist that once unfair trade is corrected and manufacturing is reshored, prices will stabilize and families will be better off. Critics respond that there is no clear mechanism by which tariffs themselves reduce costs. They shift who pays and when, but the bill still lands somewhere, usually with consumers and downstream industries. The new $2,100 figure gives critics a clean talking point, just as Trump's tariff dividends gave him one. One side says you'll get a check. The other says you're already writing one. For a Buffett-style investor, the details matter less than the pattern. The pattern here says tariffs are not a temporary tantrum. They are becoming a semi-permanent feature of U.S. policy, regardless of legal wrangling. Court decisions will change the route, not the destination. That means any business model built on ultra-cheap tariff-free imports into America is structurally riskier than it was a decade ago. The winners over the next decade will be companies that can balance domestic production with diversified sourcing, adjust to varying tariff regimes, and still maintain margins without relying on everything being made in the lowest fiat-cost country. The losers will be those that only work in a world where tariffs vanish and legal challenges always go their way. For households, the actionable lesson is simpler. Don't let anyone tell you tariffs are free. If a politician promises that a trade tax will pay for 9 different things and somehow cost you nothing, ask where the $1,200 you already paid and the $2,100 you're projected to pay are coming from. They came from higher price tags on the goods you buy, from businesses shifting costs onto you, and from a system that chose tariffs as its tool of choice instead of more transparent taxes or negotiated reforms. You can argue that shift is worth it for national security or industrial strategy. You can't argue it's painless.